Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Devil DeForce, and I'll be speaking to you this afternoon about precision farming metrics and what they can do for you.
For the people that are still in the process of joining, or maybe that have already joined, we are very curious about you. So if you feel like sharing which country you're from where you're connecting at the moment, or what your position may be, if you're an agronomist, if you're a grower, if you're from science, we are very curious to know, and we're gonna read that in the public chat if you feel comfortable to share.
Yeah, Max, I think we can kick it off if you're ready. Then we can start the conversation.
Excellent. We are connected to Boston, the US, beautiful, different regions from the world, lovely. Argentina, Portugal, terrific. Houston, US, and Egypt. There's an agronomist from Egypt joining, and also Colombia. Colombia is present. Excellent. Thanks for those insights. And we also gonna tell you something about insights today, and that is going to be precision farming metrics. And we hope with this seminar to give you a little bit of guidance, a little bit of insight into the precision agriculture insights, and what you could do with it, what you could perhaps make use of for your crop, for what you're growing. South Africa, Romania, excellent. Well, lovely, wonderful to have you all. Let's kick it off, and we'd like to encourage you to ask questions in the chat. We would like to make this as interactive as possible, so please feel free to just drop a question, so you don't have to remember it the whole webinar long, and we'll address those questions later on at that stage. And that brings me already to us. You may be curious who we are. So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Maximilian Freyer. I'm German by origin, and I'm part of Farm 21, which is a 20 to 30 people startup at the moment, scale up in the Netherlands, and we are active in the precision agriculture domain. And my personal journey went through the car industry. I worked in Internet of Things there, got exposed to data, and then brought it with me into the food and agri scene. And I'm very happy personally to try to make a little bit of a difference in how can we steward land better and how can we grow nutritious food. Over to you, Devalt.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. And again, just welcome to everyone that's on the call. Lovely to have you here. As Max mentioned, my name is Devil DeForce, and I'm the partnership manager at Farm 21. I come from about a 7-year stint in the precision ag industry, and happy to share the knowledge that we have with you this evening and to see how we can assist. Thanks, Max. Over to you.
Let's have a look at the agenda. So we're gonna run through a little bit of theory in the beginning to cover what precision agriculture or precision farming actually means and what it does not mean. And then we will look at a certain cycle of precision agriculture metrics, and how they usually unfold, and how we can make use of them, and how they may lead to a decision, how they may make us smarter or maybe more confused, we don't know. And then we would like to give you a little bit of insights into 2 use cases. So Devalt will then follow up with 2 use cases and give you a little bit of a practical insight in how precision farming metrics can be used and can be applied to a use case, to an individual, or in this case, customers of ours. And after that, we'll wrap up. We'll have a little Q&A session. We have some time in the end for you guys to ask questions, and we are very happy to answer if we can. So let's start with a little bit of theory. What is actually precision agriculture or precision farming? And there may be a lot of people claiming, they are active in precision agriculture, and there's this new great solution, and there's a satellite imagery, suddenly there's a new sensor. And but what does it actually mean to acquire all this data? So precision agriculture or precision farming basically means giving the crop, giving your crop what the crop needs, when the crop needs it, and where the crop needs it. And that kind of makes sense. Like it's the term precision. And we try to acquire all this data and all this intelligence to make the soil a bit more healthy, to give the crop a bit more nutrients, to make it more sustainable, and so on. And for that, sometimes precision really, really helps. And we're going to see that later on. And metrics, everything that's quantifiable. So it's not the gut feel, it's not the assessment, which can also be fantastic. So there may be, great farmers out there who have a great feel for their crops, and that's very interesting insight as well and very valuable. But we, in this case, focus on quantifiable measures, and that's metrics, and that's numbers in this case, and facts. And having covered precision farming, I'd like to show you a little theoretical framework that we worked on, and that's the precision agriculture cycle. So I've heard from some customers, they're already doing precision farming. And I'm like, okay, and what does it mean? So they think they don't need any more of that. And that's why I thought it's interesting to have a look at this cycle, because it's a never-ending journey, and we are continuing to learn. We don't say we figured it all out. Of course not. It's figuring out what a plant needs and what soil needs. It's just a journey, and we don't see the end of it. So we're looking here at the cycle, and we just jump straight into the top of the cycle where the season usually starts, and that reveals the question: what data do I need? And that's a big question, and there's no need to answer that. From the top. You don't know, we don't know. We have an idea. So we start with the variables that we think or you think make most.
Hi everyone, not exactly sure what happened there a minute ago. Let me just double check where Max is for his part of the presentation. 1 second. I think while we are waiting for Max to join the call again, just to continue with the message that Max was relaying regarding this precision agriculture cycle, and this proprietary cycle that I think from Farm 21's perspective, this is how we see the process working. Naturally, you'll note that it's a circular flow. So how data was processed and analyzed, and at the end of the season, how you can use this pinpoint site-specific information to actually provide insights. I am now going to go over to the next part that Max was going to introduce me to. And during the start of the webinar, he mentioned that I'll be looking at two real-life examples, or two examples of what we see precision agriculture is, and precision farming. So the first example, that I'll be addressing here like I said, as Max mentioned, this was for an apple grower in the Netherlands. And this specific client had the goal that he wanted to optimize the soil moisture and optimal fertigation practices for his specific crop. So various data points or acquiring data points were used in this example, and I'll quickly just touch on these. So the first leg of the circle that we are referring to is acquiring the data. So for this specific example, soil maps were generated by this specific client, soil maps and soil structures. This was obtained through analysis from the soil, as well as modern satellite information that's able to provide you with this sort of information. With each different soil type having varying water holding capacities, and naturally that would dictate your irrigation scheduling. The client also used soil moisture sensors or capacitance measures, a tension meter. He used these soil moisture sensors and tension curves in unison with a PF curve to identify his withering point as well as his field capacity. Further than this, weather information was gathered regarding precipitation and so forth. And then finally, naturally, the farmer has insights regarding past seasons information, be it trends or data that was gathered in a more simplified way. Once all this data was acquired, we moved over to the processing of these data points. It's super important that this information is processed and showed to the user in a user-friendly way, so it's easy to make sense of this data collected. So a user interface or a platform was used to gather all these information points. He further to this used his knowledge of farming, and he was able to compare these traditional trends. In the previous slide, during the acquisition phase, I mentioned that the client used the PF curve. And in this specific example, he was able to set warnings within the system or the interface to use. So during the assessing data phase. Given his sandy soil, he could determine the optimal levels of irrigation and for his clay soil due to the fact that he had the soil structure map. All this information, now it's been gathered, it's now visible on the platform, but now it needs to be interpreted. That's where we go to the next phase about interpreting the data and then making decisions based on said information, as it's extremely important to have site-specific info at hand. So this specific farmer was able to make better informed decisions based on the data that was collected. He could prioritize irrigation zones based on his volumetric water content trends. He adjusted his irrigation levels based on soil tension curves. What this client further did was he actually managed his target water volumetric content right before harvest. In his case, this meant that the farmer was able to squeeze or stress the fruit for optimal size and quality measurements. He needed the underlying data set to know exactly when this is and to what extent he is stressing the plant. And then naturally, he was also able to check irrigation defects based on this information that was gathered. So these were the decisions that he had to make. The best route of action was identified. And in the last phase, all these actions were being implemented. So what actions were taken, and then also what did it mean for this client at the end of the season. He was able to spend time and water in the right zones instead of walking around blindly looking for water defects or not having the insights regarding your irrigation scheduling. This specific farmer was able to have a pinpoint accurate insights regarding these values. He was able to fine-tune his drip irrigation, like I mentioned, based on this volumetric water content. And then he actually was able to identify but also repair irrigation defects before it had a material impact on his crop for the given season. What did this mean for the farmer at the end of the day? And we actually had a discussion with him after the season. Looking at past trends, he was able to increase his yield. The quality of his fruit increased due to having the insights regarding the underlying data. And then his inputs also decreased based on the water usage, but also time spent in field. That was the first example that I'm gonna discuss with you this evening. Again, if any of these data points, there was any questions, please let us know. But just to recap, so we went from the acquiring data point, we processed the information, the data was assessed on a platform and interpreted. This led the farmer to make better informed decisions. He went over to the planning phase and then to action. So you can see this is the cycle. And then at the end of the season, he was also able to learn. I think there's a large buildup of knowledge for these farmers. They are the ones that know their crop and their soil the best. So this is the cycle that we see happening from season to season. The more information you can gather, the better you will be in making decisions regarding the best route of action.
Hi, Devalt. Just trying to let you know that I'm back.
Thanks, Max. Yeah,
we're connected.
Not sure what happened there, but I just picked up the rest of the conversation.
Excellent. Let's just continue.
Yep. Thank you. For the second example today, I'm going to use perennial crop analysis. So how does precision farming pertain to citrus orchard, apple growers, nut growers, whatever the case may be? And for this example, I'm going to focus more on drones or unmanned aerial vehicles, the collection of insights that they afford the modern farmer, and what we can do with that data. So for this example, we used drones, like I mentioned, and we collected different data sources from this drone. One being NDVI, which is a vegetation index, or better said, like a biomass indicator. NDRE, which is a measure of chlorophyll content in the plant. And I know of quite a few companies seeing this as the plant's health, being that anything that prohibits the plant from photosynthesizing optimally needs to be investigated. There's thermal imageries available through these drones, so essentially measuring the transpiration rates, and then trees can also be sized by these drones. So for this example, this was our acquiring data phase. The farmer flew a drone over said crops. This data was then processed and viewed. So said information was analyzed by machine learning models and displayed visually on a platform, as well as a mobile scouting application. In the examples below, which you will see in the assessing data, I'm just going to quickly provide you with a quick overview of what are you seeing in these images. So the image to the bottom left here is a transpiration distribution. This is gathered by the thermal imagery, and this can almost be seen as an irrigation audit. So you will be able to identify areas with high and low transpiration, essentially being an indicator of the plant's availability to get water from the soil. Further with this information, you're able to identify blockages or pressure issues. And I mean, it is, as you know, it is extremely important that you have optimal irrigation distribution during key phenological stages of the season. Most of these modern farmers are fertigating, so it's almost becomes a double fault if you have areas which are not optimally irrigated. The top image, you see a NDRE map. So like I mentioned, that is the chlorophyll content of the plant, or essentially the health metric that can be measured. Once we have these areas identify of higher health or chlorophyll and lower health, the mobile scouting app, which is another tool that can be used to acquire data, but also assess and process it, is then used to identify these areas, and scouting or monitoring routes can be set up to go investigate what the causes are of the lower health metrics that you are seeing through the images. A lot of information and insights can be provided regarding best areas where you can take leaf and soil samples. It is better time efficiency if you can share this data with your consultants without them having to be on the farm. Then finally, in this image, the final one that you see here in red and yellow, that is what they call a variable rate application map or prescription map. So what this information affords you is that you can apply or make specific interventions on a per site basis from your fertilizer application for your trees with your lower health metrics and smaller size to chemical foliar sprays for certain growth and pest and disease management. Again, all this insight's only available to you because you've gathered the high resolution imagery during the acquisition phase of the cycle. All this information is then interpreted so that we can make better decisions. So as I mentioned, the decisions that we can make here was that the thermal images was identification of irrigation defects, your distribution of your irrigation. Essentially what can be done is the areas are located for the application of mulch, for instance, then your areas of high thermal activity to preserve the water moisture. Those areas can specifically be identified. I mentioned it's an irrigation system audit, knowing where you have pressure issues. And again, with the fertigation being highly important, it is important to know where and when to fertigate. Finally here, the data is also visible on the mobile scouting app. Like I mentioned, in-field assessments can also be captured. So once these areas have been identified, it will be easier to identify pests and diseases before they have a material impact on your crop at the end of the season. So once these decisions were made, we move to the planning phase and then taking action in field. So from a time perspective, you are able to spend the optimal amount of time in the right areas to manage your water. You can have a strategic approach to your water management. By using the mobile scouting app and underlying data source, you have improved efficiency of your scouts. And then the variable rate application just affords you the option to apply certain chemicals or fertilizers area specific. All this information naturally has to lead to good results at the end of the season. And by using all these matrices, this farmer was able to increase his yield and his quality, having the insights. By also using the variable rate application, he was able to increase the uniformity of his trees. That makes it easier to manage and easier to forecast. And he was also able to decrease his inputs. Again, this is the results of a season's work of assessing, looking at the data, making informed decisions. He was able to make those changes at the end of the season and then naturally learn from what he did. That was the examples that I wanted to run you guys through during this evening. I'm going to pass over to Max again, where he's just going to give you a quick insight regarding what's coming at Farm 21.
Hi, Dewald. Can you hear me? I'm assuming that Dewald finished the theory of the precision agriculture cycle. We'll just crack on, and we are very happy to show you some of the work we did. And that is basically zooming into one of those use cases and having a closer look of the data we can acquire and the data from different resources especially. So here you see a very classic biomass index. It's an NDVI, and that usually comes from the satellite. And you may have seen this before. You have simple colors that show which areas are in a healthy condition and which areas may be less healthy, and that would be red in this case. But what you may not see from the start here in this picture is that we also have some weather data to the left. So we try to incorporate as many different sources of data that we can. And that is satellite, and that is a ground sensor, but that is also the weather station. And we will release the satellite feature shortly, and we really believe that in cross-validating, for example, moisture, by those different sources of data, we can get more insights. And at this point, I would like to answer a question straight away, and that was regarding the satellite image. How is the satellite image linked to the soil water assessment? So the satellite can also measure a moisture index. It's also a very common way how these satellites work, and we are basically measuring moisture through the satellite, through the soil sensor in the soil, but also through precipitation, which is then the weather station telling us where do we stand with our moisture. And that is extremely helpful to be precise, to really apply precision farming. So this is something a customer of ours would see in the dashboard. And moving on to the next picture, this is even a more detailed view where we zoom into the field and we can toggle towards different warning systems. We have parameters, we have certain risk traffic lights linked to drought, we have a certain growth variable, which is then usually impacted by the NDVI we just spoke about, but we also have pest, or we have disease. And you may wonder, why do we need, for example, moisture to determine a pest or a disease? Well, we can't really predict any pest just by moisture. It's just one helpful data variable to acquire. But what we can see, for example, by cross-validating the different sources of data and looking at the different variables, for example, in a certain use case, we see, hey, the biomass index has declined. So we see a certain red corner of the field. But looking at the sensors, they say we have enough moisture. So something else must be playing out here. Maybe it's a pest, maybe it's a disease. We don't know. Maybe it's too much water indeed. And that can be a very likely trigger an increase in pest, in the likelihood of pests showing up. So this is just to give you an idea of how you could access those data. We spoke about accessing data in the precision agriculture cycle before. So below, you see here in the bottom half of the picture, very interesting trend lines that give you certain peaks and certain lows of the history. And it's also very important to look at the history of the data. How did my last year look like? How does maybe the data of a neighbor look like? And based on the historic data, we can also make very intelligent predictions in the next season or for today. And similarly here, we're looking at a different variable. We are looking at growth, risk, for example, and the light is on green. You see very healthy trend lines. Below, you see a nice soil temperature. The picture may be quite small, which is why I'm reading it out to you. And you also see, the BBCH scale, which is basically a qualitative scale. And you may know it's telling us something about the phenological growth stage of a plant. And that is also very helpful. And this is usually entered by the farmer. It can also be measured by the satellite, and both data points, again, are really valuable to cross-validate. So this is a bit what we offer at Farm 21, and perhaps developed would like to tell you a little bit more about why or ourselves from other solutions, from existing solutions out there, which are also extremely helpful. But we just have thought, and the development teams over the past years, they have thought about something that may be interesting to talk about. And that is something that differentiates us from other players in the market. Over to you, Devolve.
Thanks, Max. Thanks for giving us a brief overview of what the new clients or existing clients of ours can expect with the release of our satellite information. I wanted to highlight this image before we move over to the Q&A section. To just reiterate, after looking at the cycle that we just showed everyone, that it's extremely important to have enough data points collected to make informed decisions. And to get back to what Mark says, I think that's our distinguishing factor. Looking at the image, you see the satellite imagery that Mark's mentioned. We'll have high resolution imagery from Planet on our platform available. That'll be 3x7 by 3x7 imagery and available daily. But we'll also have a free option available on our platform where you can get the lower resolution imaging, the use of our mobile scouting app, and the whole package of things for free, just to assist the farmer as best we can. So looking at the satellite information, then we have the scouting data, as I also mentioned in the example. So we see in Farm 21's perspective how the daily satellite imagery can be used to identify high-risk areas. You are then able to score those specific risks on the scouting app, which will then read back into the Farm 21 platform, and we'll be able to provide you with a bit more insights regarding the specific risks involved in certain fields or orchards, because we can't expect everyone to make sense of this data on a daily basis. We want to assist you and to make sense, but also provide you with all the insights that's required. Then we have the sensor data, and we've developed proprietary low-cost sensors in the Netherlands, which is designed and manufactured here. It's about 4 to 5 times cheaper than anything similar in the market. And the affordability of these devices allow for a grid-like data collection fashion. As you saw in the first example that I showed, the apple grower was able to generate a soil structure map and have soil sensors in each and every different soil structure, just to ensure that he has a generalized idea about what's happening below your soil. And if you are planning to manage your irrigation effectively based on these readings, it would make sense to have a more informed or grid-like view of the data points. Something interesting here, speaking about the satellite, and I noted the question regarding the satellite information and the moisture. So what the satellite actually does is it measures the water content in the leaves of the plant. Essentially, it shoots out different wavelengths of light, and how that light reflects back from the leaf to the camera is how these insights are generated. So now you sit with a spatial information generated from the satellite. What we are working on at the moment is that we would like to calibrate what we are getting from the satellite to what's actually happening in the soil from the soil moisture sensors as well. So having an idea from the transpiration or how well the leaves are assessing the water in the soil, but also being able to identify the availability of water in the soil. And from Farm 21's perspective, is we believe this affordable solution allows you for a higher data collection density. And at the end of the day, again, looking at the precision farming cycle, we believe incorporating these data points, learning from them, would also afford you the same benefits that we had with the 2 clients that we showed, from increased yield to a decrease in input costs. I think the total farming environment or ecosystem is under extreme pressure for the past 2 years, given the input costs and logistics issues. So I think trying to get as much out of your land as possible, but at the same time doing so in a sustainable way will be the goal of the future. So I think that is all from me, Max. I don't know if you have any more comments before we move over to the Q&A section for 10 minutes. Again, this is now the time. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat.
No additions from my side at this point. Let's give the words to our audience, and we are very curious to hear what questions you have and yeah, where we could be of help.
Yeah, I think just quickly to start off with the first question that I'm reading regarding, I'm not exactly sure who it was, but are the insights of the volumetric water content provided by the sensor? Yes. So it is used in unison with the PF curve, and naturally you'll need to know which soil type the sensor is being installed in. On the sensor, there is specific calibration profiles uploaded. So if you know your soil type, you can automatically choose the specific calibration. But if needed, you can then use the standardized PF curve to set certain warnings in place when it relates to your volumetric water content. As I mentioned, your withering point and field capacity. Should any of these values approach the thresholds put in place, the system will automatically warn you that you have a high risk area and that you need to pay attention to said.
Allow me to pick up a quick one from the chat. What are possible irrigation defects? And that may allude to the slabbercorn use case where he had an irrigation defect. So if we assume a sprinkler irrigation, you could run into issues like a clogged nozzle, or a plant is growing and is obstructing with its leaves certain parts of the sprinkler, so it cannot function freely anymore. Sometimes plastic nozzles also break. It's a device constantly under pressure, so it helps to simply monitor them by means of the sensor and see if the water is distributing evenly. You want to pick another one, Dewald?
Yeah, sure. I think just to continue with that, in the second example, when it related to irrigation defects, was pressure issues as well, blocked lines, which regularly happen, especially if the guys are using drip irrigation and they fertigate. Those lines are extremely prone to blockages, and it would make sense to flush those lines at certain instances during the season. Okay, I see the question was answered by Max, but again, currently our soil moisture sensors measures 7 metrics. It is your soil moisture at 10, 20, and 30 centimeters below soil, as well as your soil temperature at 2 measurements. Then above ground in your microclimate or your canopy, we measure the temperature as well as the humidity. That can actually be used for pest and disease management, being able to identify site-specific information relating to certain pests and diseases for your crop type. We've actually also identified with a recent client during the week that they've been using the soil sensors, especially the temperature measurements below soil, for frost warnings, because that's also a warning where you can get a notification for. So if temperatures drop extremely low and you need to make certain interventions, these sensors can be used to gather this information.
Coming back to another one.
Yeah.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead, Walt.
No, yeah. I see there was a question relating to the images. Will they be complementary with the sensor? So there's a free module, just to explain, where you get the use of the platform. You get the use of the scouting app. satellite information, the low resolution satellite information. Once you then move and you purchase a sensor, then you will be able to get your sensor insights naturally, and then there's the option to move to our premium satellite services as well. But with this sensor, there's quite a lot of information that is available to you.
And choosing another one, I like this question a lot. So are the satellite images in real time, and are the sensors measuring in real time? And the answer is yes. And we think that is very important, because we cannot really rely on historical data to make any decision, or even data that is, I don't know, 2 or 3 days old, because it may already be too late. And also, let's say in terms of vineyards, it is actually too late if the satellite detects a decrease in the biomass index, because then you would already see brown leaves, and that's way too late. So we need to tackle the issues and give the crop what it needs, when it needs it, and where it needs it straight away. So we only rely on real-time data. Having said that, this data may be 2, 3 to 6 hours old, simply, and that can be adjusted, for example, in our device, simply because it is a battery consideration here. So if you want to send data every hour, and if you really want to know data every hour, for example, for a scientific reason, then you can, but then the battery may be empty after 4 months. And if you say, I'm a farmer, I'm okay looking at the data every evening before I go to bed to have a relaxed sleep, then it's fine to have this data ready every day at 8 p.m. and the battery will last much longer, which results in a ease of use. So you don't have to plug the sensor from your field and charge it. But live data is crucial in order to make decisions in time.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Just to quickly add there, again, there's the 2 satellite options, the one giving you information about once every 5 days, weather permitting, at a low resolution, and then option 2 being our daily, essentially real-time information that you can get from the satellites. The sensors as well, you can basically set how often the sensors take a measurement and how often it is sent to the cloud environment for you to assess. So we give you that flexibility. The next one relates to where's our weather information coming from. We use Open Weather API. So once you draw up, obviously open up an account on Farm 21, you will draw field boundaries for specific areas that you want information from. That information is then used to pull in area or location specific weather information for you. Next one. I see a question relating to what's the best vegetation index to use for a tree. Again, it's a tricky question to answer. It's depending on what you would like to measure or what information you are after. Again, your NDVI will give you a biomass indication. So essentially a growth that could be used for pruning, for instance, being able to see where you need to spend some time. But then you also have your NDRE or the chlorophyll. Again, I mean, there's a lot of insights that can be gathered from knowing that a tree is not performing optimally, and then to understand why that is so. So, I mean, again, it is a conversation that we can have, I think, in a bit more detail, depending on what sort of level and information you are after.
And I think that translates nicely into the next question, which asks, as a precision farming specialist, can you work with any type of crop? And again, you have a lot of different data sources at your disposal. So choosing the right data points is already tricky. And that's usually what a precision farming specialist does. But of course, they need to be targeted towards your crop. That is important. And an easy example here, So the root depth, the root length, and that grows into the depth of the soil is very relevant. There are, for example, potatoes that nicely grow until I think about 30 centimeters or a little bit more. And then you have perennials that grow until 1 meter. So the moisture index and the trend lines, they will look very different because, in case of vineyards or of perennials, in this case, you need to measure very deeply. And it could be that the plants are actually perfectly happy when having enough moisture at a very deep level. To answer the question, yes, you can. As a precision farming specialist, you can work for any type of crop, but we highly recommend people to also work closely with agronomists who have studied corn for a decade, who have studied vegetables for a decade, because they all behave differently.
Okay, thanks, Max. So the next question I'm just seeing is, and just being cognizant of the time to quickly answer these. What is our satellite imagery platform? It is on the Farm21 platform. So anyone can open a free account at farm21.com. Just a side note, that information will only be available at the end of the month. So again, you're free to open an account in the meantime, but then you will have this information available to you then. We don't at the moment, and just the next question reads, besides temperature and moisture, do you have any data regarding pest and disease prevention? Any sensors or modules? Well, no. So the sensor that we currently have is the only hardware that we offer. But like I mentioned, you're able to upload your cultivation plan for your specific crop for the season. We do measure your growing degree days as well. So you can basically identify when the plant is moving into its next phenological stage and which pests might be prevalent during that specific time. This can then also be double checked with the satellite data layers. So again, I mean, please feel free to reach out to me regarding what sort of sensors or modules you are referring to. But at the moment, from a hardware perspective, temperature and moisture and humidity is basically the three main variables that we measure.
And that means we cannot conclude to any pest, but we can certainly imply and infer to a certain warning that it is highly likely there's a pest at work here because moisture is looking fine. You have a great soil structure. The biomass index is giving some low values. So we can certainly infer towards pests. And there are also other attractive solutions out there that we are currently investigating. So there may be an app, a certain scanner that scans the leaf of a plant and also the little white box on it. And then the farmer can receive information what bug or what pest it can actually be. And this is also something we can integrate in our scouting app in the future. But that is in the future. So it's not something available as of yet.
Yeah, thanks.
What satellite coverage for the US? I think we have a global provider. We have also different resolutions and different packages for your needs. So our highest resolution is 3.7 meters, and our free solution is 10 meters times 10 meters, and that is global, the coverage. So there's no specific solution for the US.
I'll take just to add there. We have coverage in the whole of the US. Our premium satellite provider provides us. They're called Planet, based in the US, and they provide insights. So the US gets daily images. There's certain other areas of the world where it might only be bi-daily, but I know for sure that the US will receive, naturally being weather dependent, you will receive daily images. The next one, last two questions, I think, before we log off, just to be cognizant of time. it just reads, how do you measure the field capacity of the soil? I think firstly, we need to know what sort of soil type it is. And then we plot that specific soil type on the PF curve. The PF curve, given your soil type, gives you an indication of what your withering point and what your field capacity is, assuming we know exactly what the soil type is. And then finally, do you need a soil texture analysis in order for your moisture sensors to work? No, not at all. From our perspective and the use case that I showed, it was just an indication that this farmer wanted to specifically place a soil moisture sensor in each of his different soil types. But I mean, we have a lot of clients that make use of single point sensors. You don't necessarily have to have an analysis done. Again, please feel free. I think you will have, I will just put my email address down in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If you'd like to continue the discussion, we can arrange a meeting to do so. So please feel free to reach out. If there's no more questions, I think, Max, we can just finish this off.
Yes, and I would like to thank everyone for his and her time and attention, and that you stayed with us. And also, if you have any form of feedback, it can be positive, it can be less positive, and something that you may have wished for, in the seminar that we did not cover. Please let us know. Just connect via a brief email, and we will be very happy to serve you with what you need and the information that you would like to hear next time, and next seminars, also in different languages, will come your way.
Yeah, just some final thoughts again as well. Thank you for everyone that joined. Like I said, let's stay in touch, and hopefully there's some touch points between your businesses and ours. Please feel free to reach out, and then have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, guys.